we're starting off with a progress update by Sergio Ruiz. I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing the surname correctly. Sergio is the founder and managing director of Methuselah Fund. He has previously given a progress update at an in-person meeting that we did last year, but I'm terribly excited to hear what's new on your plate, and I'm going to share more information about you in the chat. But I think you could tell us better what's been happening for the Methuselah Fund and the various projects that you're funding. So Sergio, your 5 minutes are running now, and for anyone who has questions, just feel free to, after Sergio stops, to dive in or collect them marked with a Q in the chat. All right, Sergio, the stage is yours. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Allison. It's so good to see so many familiar faces. 2020 has been a ridiculous year, but amidst the craziness that's still not over, our focus has been to double down on the science. So at the Methuselah Fund, we decided to pause fundraising for Methuselah Fund number 2 and instead to become even more hands-on with each one of our portfolio companies. I didn't prepare any slides because I want to be cognizant of the time constraints. But maybe I just go down the list. So Leucadia Therapeutics, I talked to Doug Ethel 2 days ago. He's very excited because they have a working algorithm-based diagnostic and machine learning and AI-based diagnostic component for Alzheimer's disease. They're currently tweaking and optimizing the diagnostic so that we will be able to predict whether or not we're going to get Alzheimer's in the future. And hopefully with that and with all that data that he's gathering through a study that's going on, he calls it the Cribros study, we will be able to bring all this data into the FDA and then push the device that has already been developed at Leucadia Therapeutics. The device is going to be able to hopefully prevent the pathology and the disease. Now, this data, he gathered about 600 cribriform plate images from different people in the Riverside, Los Angeles area, and then COVID hit, and because of a lot of the study participants are older, they did the ethical thing, which was to pause it. But the goal is to continue the study and gather about another 1,500 sets of cribriform plates. For those who don't know, the idea is Alzheimer's happens because our cribriform plate gets ossified as we age. And there's a direct correlation between developing Alzheimer's and dementias and having our cribriform plate ossified. Turn Bio is another company, cellular reprogramming. We've been very excited because now we are able to transfect into different tissues. So our goal is to reverse aging at a cellular level, which in turn affects the tissue, affects the organ, and creates a youthful environment. And we see it. One of our targets is dermatology, and we have other targets that are opportunistic, like COPD/COVID survivor patients and osteoarthritis. We're seeing a lot of deals, pharma deals happening, even though a lot of the attention is on the vaccine. A lot of big pharmas are looking for deals. So Turn is talking to 2 big pharmas, Visian Biosciences and Volumetric, which are 3D printed technologies to be able to create models for disease and drug development, are also talking to top 5 pharmas. And then Visient, the CEO, just joined Organovo again. And then my partner at the Methuselah Fund is now part of the Organovo board member. Organovo is a publicly traded company. So we're looking forward to helping progress that 3D bioprinting industry. And then just to finalize, with us, we have Ocean and Oncocenex, which are also engaged in pharma deals. And with that, at Methuselah, as a foundation, as a fund, we're now going to be launching a second prize with NASA, in partnership with NASA and the Canadian Space Agency, in order to hit the intersection of space, longevity, and food. So unfortunately, because the prize hasn't been launched, it's going to be launched in January. I can't divulge a lot of information, but I can do a lot of one-on-ones. For anyone who wants to participate in this really cool prize, there's some multi-million-dollar prize. So we're really hoping to see a lot of interest in a lot of teams, and of course, to leverage that to invest in those teams and in new technologies that may come out of it. Think of it a Y Combinator model based on prices, right? I think that's my 5 minutes.
Wow, lovely. That's a lot that you covered in 5 minutes. Okay, amazing. I think we already have our first question by Lee, and if anyone would like to go afterwards, just spit it out. Lee, what's your question?
Yeah, you beat me to it. I just looked up the website to see if the answer was there. So first of all, Sergio, thank you for that. I wondered if this was a digital biomarker for Alzheimer's, like Altoida.
So there is a way to create, there's a cognitive test that they have developed. So in a way, yes, there's a way to make it a digital biomarker. Yeah, I mean, you could say it is. It is. I mean, it's just an image of your cribriform plate, and it's a very high resolution scan. Think about when it's all said and done, it looks like a mountain ridge. And the idea is to do that imaging every 2 to 5 years, depending on how old you are, and then see how that mountain ridge changes and how the landscape is essentially closing up so that those rivers dry up and your brain essentially gets starved from a source of getting rid of the trash, which is the amyloid beta, tau tangles and such. So I guess you could call it a digital biomarker.
Yeah, I looked up, I see what it is. So I'll put it under imaging mentally. And I just wondered originally if you were competing with Altoida, because I know they're very advanced in the digital biomarker space, but I looked at the website, I'll put this as imaging. I'm sure you're aware of that. For example, particularly in China, you may be aware of the investments with Janssen, etc., because they want to detect Alzheimer's early, because there's so many Chinese needing to look after the elderly parents. And you can potentially detect this 10 to possibly even 20 years away, and then you can begin intervening early.
So there are a couple interesting points to emphasize about this, about Leucadia's marker. So first of all, since it came along, the space of non-invasive biomarkers for dementias and neurodegenerative diseases kind of exploded. Right? We've got blood biomarkers now, we've got eye scans, and there's actually multiple different kinds of blood biomarkers. So there's a lot more competition than there had been, and those things have kind of advanced a lot faster than I expected them to. The thing that's particularly notable about Leucadia's that I think is very interesting if it works is that it will actually detect ahead of any of these other ones, because they're all detecting after the amyloid beta starts to build up, whereas it's actually predictive of the thing that most of these other non-invasive scans are likely to detect in the first place.
I appreciate that, and thank you for letting me know. And also, I don't have to throw it in here because I don't want to burn any time up, but the other interesting thing along with all these non-invasive biomarkers is we've come to understand Alzheimer's is more than one disease, and yet we've been focusing on the wrong one. I don't know if you have anything to say there on that front, Carl, or if it even fits, but it's very interesting that we bet on the wrong disease and we assumed it was one disease.
I want to be aware of the time. So all I would say is, in the meantime, Doug actually came out with a book called Remembering Apples. Doug has been teaching as a neuroscientist, other doctors and neurosurgeons about the pathology and the disease for a long time. So really cool. It's a little novel that tackles why we have been wrong, or the entire establishment has been wrong throughout the years. So I would suggest that you read it. It's called Remembering Apples.
All right, sweet. I'll try to find a link and share it here in the chat. And we're going to have a longer group discussion afterwards. But for now, I'd love to see if Ole wants to give an update on Apollo, and maybe, just for anyone who isn't aware of what Apollo is doing, before you give the update, just say, what is Apollo doing? You are muted. I will unmute you if you don't mind.
Now you can hear me, right? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so Apollo is a VC company that is investing in therapeutics against age-related diseases and aging itself. So we are completely focused on longevity. We are quite agnostic regarding the first indication the therapeutics have that we invest in. But for us, it's important that they affect one of the basic mechanisms of aging. And I mean, they are pretty much what you can find in the paper, the hallmarks of aging. The stuff we are focusing on is very similar. You can find that on our website. And what is special about Apollo is that we not only invest money, we also build companies up ourselves. So 50% of the money that we have, we use for building own companies. We are now raising our second fund. We just started with raising the money before COVID started. So I think that gave us a proper delay of 3 to 4 months. And we were really thinking about what to do when COVID started, because we knew that we couldn't do any meetings. So we focused on our portfolio companies. We also started 2 new companies in the time where we couldn't do fundraising. They're still under the radar, but I think, we will announce them very soon. Very interesting projects. And the last 2 months, we started with fundraising again. We could do our first closing, which is very nice. We are now half through, so we want to raise 100 to 120 million and deploy that in the space. And we are now at 65 million, which is very nice. And then we were also, of course, thinking if we use the COVID story for our companies, because there's so much attention on it. And we have a company in the autophagy space and the rapamycin space. Of course, we could have applied for grants and so on and so forth. And we could have also changed the story or strategy of the companies and make them more COVID focused. But we decided against that. What we rather did, and this is also maybe my message to the audience. We are not focusing on COVID at all with none of our companies, because we think it's important that we make PR for the entire longevity space, and that we tell the story that it's not important to focus on a single disease like COVID, but that we have to solve the underlying problems. And the underlying problem of COVID is that people have like a messed up immune system that is not working anymore because they age. And these are also the people that die from COVID mostly, older people, and that we rather have to do something against immune aging. So we didn't focus on COVID at all. We also didn't consider any investment in that space. We rather worked on a PR strategy. We have also released some articles in the German-speaking area, and we will very soon start to release some articles also in the English press in the US, UK. So far, my update to Apollo.
Lovely, thank you so much. Okay, also quite a lot cooking there. Does anyone have any questions to Apollo? Do you want to ask Ola anything? Now you have him here on the call.
I guess I can ask a question.
Go for it, yeah.
So we're always interested in figuring out what technology is next, right? What are your thoughts on what is the up and coming tech that will take us that much further as far as creating a lifespan?
So I think that the autophagy space is very interesting. So the first companies are built in that space. For example, our portfolio company, Samsara, is the biggest screening platform for compounds that are activating autophagy. And I really believe that autophagy plays a role in every aging process. And thus, I see a big chance in activating autophagy to fight aging. So if I would place a bet, I would place a bet in the autophagy space. And the thing is, we would also do some further investments there. It's not like that we do one investment in one area and then we go to the next area. No, if there are 2 or 3 good companies, we put our money there. But I also would have to say that I think it will take some time in the autophagy space. If you are looking at technologies that are soon on the market, I'm very bullish about senescent cell clearance and rapamycin analogs.
I've got one question for you about the structure of Apollo. So as I recall, Apollo began as essentially a kind of coalition of family offices.
That's true, yeah.
Is that still a good description of what Apollo is?
No.
Or is it now more like a traditional VC or venture fund?
So in the beginning, we had a model similar to Juvenescence from UK. But we decided against that model. I think that model works very good if you want to make a lot of money as the GP or as the owner of the company. But Niels and me, we are really mission driven. So what we like to do is to deploy the most money in the space as possible. And we think that the traditional fund model is better for that. And of course, this is not our last fund. So we want to keep this fund small. So it's a very traditional fund. So it's completely traditional structure here. And you want to rather keep it small. So 100 to 120 million. You want to be very stingy with our investment decisions to make high multiples. And then what we really want to do is to try to raise as much money as possible for the space. So of course, after we have raised this fund, we will raise the next fund. And very soon we want to raise an Apollo Growth Fund, if you will call it like that, where we want to deploy much more money and invest in, not in pre-seed and seed, but more in series A and B. So that's the reasoning behind it.
Thanks.
As a more traditional VC fund now, is the company building aspect somewhat unusual in the traditional VC structure?
It's kind of unusual. I think it's not very common, but there are also other people who are doing that. For example, Flagship Pioneering is doing it. Atlas Venture is doing it. I think Arch is also doing company building. So it's not completely unusual. But the thing is, we really like to be involved. And first of all, we think it makes a lot of sense, but we also think that we can reach higher multiples with this strategy. Because when we do company building, we really do everything. We license technology from professors or universities. Then we set up a senior team. We have an expert for indication selection. We have an expert for drug development plans, and so on and so forth. We do all that stuff. We put in 1.5 to 2.5 million. And then after 1 year, when we have done everything, we raise a follow-on funding on 3 to 5x, and we still own about 50% of the company. That's a very nice point to start. But we are really, we really try to achieve high multiples to raise more money for the space. And that's why we also started now to do a PR strategy, because we want to raise more attention, awareness for the space, that more people invest into that space. And we are very happy about everyone who's joining the space. If there are other companies or other VCs, we are happy to collaborate with them. So we don't see them as competition, but as people who build up the industry.
All right, lovely. I'm sure that there's a lot more questions, but in the interest of time, before we move to the more open-ended discussion, Reason, do you want to go and tell us what's new on Repair Biotech?
I will go. I will share a screen because I do actually have a deck, more for the purpose of reminding people what we're up to here than anything else. So we're talking about Repair Biotechnologies, company I co-founded with Bill German that I've been talking to most of you about for a couple of years now. We are working on reversing conditions like atherosclerosis, in which there is too much cholesterol somewhere in your body and it's killing you. And we're doing this by the very direct way of just getting rid of the cholesterol. We have a platform that provides a pathway to degrade cholesterol, and we can choose how we give this to cells in a variety of approaches. And earlier this year, and in a number of studies since then, we have demonstrated quite robustly that we something like halve the cholesterol in the liver without causing ill effects to the animals involved. And this obviously gives us a very direct pathway to conditions in which you have too much cholesterol in your liver, which in this age of cheap calories and too many cheap calories is a prevalent problem. But we're still mostly interested in atherosclerosis. So new things. And I have to say that I'm a little limited in what I can tell you right now, and I will explain a little more about that later. But we are settling on our primary thrust here being, firstly, atherosclerosis through cell therapy. What we will do, for some definition of we, is to essentially use induced pluripotent stem cells to produce monocyte lines that bear our cholesterol-degrading proteins. Then we will use these in mice to demonstrate that this can actually go reverse atherosclerotic plaque. For those of you who need a refresher on that, the reason you young people don't have atherosclerotic plaque is because your monocytes and macrophages are working just fine. The reason that old people do have atherosclerotic plaque is that your monocytes and macrophages are kind of overwhelmed by broken cholesterols. And this is essentially the point of intervention that seems to be the most useful place to start with atherosclerosis, which is a condition that's rather similar to Alzheimer's in the sense that the entire research community has been doing something that really is not effective for the last 20 to 30 years, and has got rather stuck on there and needs a revolution. So we intend to be a revolution. The second thing we can do, and I should say that these are not the only two things we can do. There is a laundry list as long as your arm of weird conditions in which you have too much cholesterol somewhere in your body, is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So this is what happens when your normal fatty liver disease just gets really OTT, at which point you just have these cholesterol crystals in your liver cells and everything starts to go really, really quite south. It's much more obnoxious than merely fatty liver disease. And if you could take somebody who has NASH and put them back into the state of merely having fatty liver disease, that would be great. That's a $22 billion market. It's a really big deal. So we're settling on an mRNA strategy here. There are certainly many choices for the vector you can use because pretty much everything you put into mice or humans goes to the liver. So we're working on that. And these are the two things that we're kind of doing here. And I should say, read the stuff I can't talk about. We're sitting on really, really great data right now, really great data. And we are nailing it down over the next month or two. And if it continues to bear up, we will be straight into a clinical round by the end of this year, raising to go into trials. We're filing a bunch of patents. The delay on talking to people about this is that we're filing 3 provisional patents right now. And until they're in, we really can't talk much about what's actually going on under the hood of this company. But things are rolling right now. Very, very pleased with the way things are going. Any questions from the group?
I just wondered if you could say something about what type of cholesterol, because you're meaning damaged cholesterol, and I would love it if you could explain what you're meaning by damaged cholesterol. Just an introduction.
Oh, damaged cholesterol. Well, the approach we have, you can go look at the original papers by the research team that produced this. Since that's all patented, we're quite open about, what the biochemistry is here. Essentially, anything that looks like cholesterol with a ring is fair game for our cholesterol degradation proteins. So that means, 99% of all modified cholesterols. As I'm sure you're aware, Underdog goes after one of the worst, which is 7-keto cholesterol. we can break down that as well as acetylated, oxidized, add your chemical of choice as a additional group to cholesterol and make it do bad things in a cell. We will break it down. And in addition, too much cholesterol, period, is actually bad, even not considering the oxidized and horribly messed up variants. NASH is an excellent example of just, it wouldn't matter if you didn't have oxidized cholesterol in your system. You just have so much cholesterol in your liver that the thing is just going to get messed up regardless. So we just have to get rid of that. This is definitely a very potent technology in terms of its breadth, both in the number of indications that can be targeted and in the fact that just all cholesterols are fair game.
Thank you.
Any other Thanks. Any other questions? Okay, thanks. I have a few questions for all of you in the discussion, but for now, I think it would be awesome, Carl, if you wanted to give a brief update. I contacted you because I saw that you had some exciting I think updates on biotech.info, and you're like, no, actually, this is not worthy of discussion yet, but there are some really exciting updates in your very, very investigative vitamin D and COVID-19 excursions that you've been doing, and I can't wait for you to share them. Is it okay for me to share the Twitter statuses that you sent me with a group for context?
That's
yeah,
fine.
cool.
So, I mean, I agree with Reason and with Aubrey that supplements and diet and lifestyle only take you so far, and they're not going to get us past 120. And that's why I focus on rejuvenation and stuff normally. But then COVID hit, and I got distracted in the spring by what seemed like a much quicker way to save lives with the vitamin D advocacy. And we talked about that in one of the sessions a few sessions ago. And I just wanted to, so I had tried to drop that in August and go back to updating agingbiotech.info, which I did for, about 10 companies. And then a whole bunch of interesting developments happened with vitamin D that pulled me back in for a week or so here. And so just quick updates to sort of cap this group's summary on that subject. So vitamin D, the background high level reminder is vitamin D appears to be a potential game changer for the pandemic. 40% of the world is deficient at the 20 nanogram per milliliter blood level, and 60% of the world at the 30 level that the Endocrine Society says you shouldn't be below. And, the pandemic's, sustaining itself on 2% of the population. It's quite possible that the early data suggests that it might be that if everybody wasn't vitamin D deficient, there wouldn't be a pandemic. Now that the evidence doesn't support that conclusively yet, but it's not inconsistent with that possibility. And so what's happening is that vitamin D is going through the kind of inflection reversal in consensus that facial cloth masks went through in the spring, where there was a lot of skepticism and suppression, and then we got a consensus on that. And so what's happened since the last time this group talked about vitamin D, when Amy was here and we had a couple of other things, is that I sent an email to the group about the first pilot randomized controlled trial that took place, and just a quick reminder about how huge of an effect size that was. In Spain, they gave some people vitamin D who had been hospitalized, and 50% of the people who were not given vitamin D, the controls, had to proceed to go to the ICU, and two of 26 of those died. And the people who were given vitamin D, only 2%, 1 out of 50 people had to go to the ICU, and none of them died. And so when you take the small sample size and look at the confidence interval, the 95% confidence interval of that study, the multivariate odds ratio was that the people who got vitamin D were 75% less likely to proceed to the ICU. And so you compare that effect size, which takes the small sample size into account, against the effect size that caused the World Health Organization recently to advocate for steroid use. And of course, dexamethasone is the #1 top best treatment we have that's been approved so far. And roughly speaking, steroids reduce deaths by 1/3. So here we've got a completely safe molecule that reduces death, that reduces severity by more than twice the effect of the best known available treatment. And of course, you can't use steroids prophylactically, whereas you can with vitamin D. So that pulls us up to where we just were right after the last meeting. So since then, the biggest review on the subject has been fully published. That's Linda Benskin's review, which reviews almost 150 other studies. That's now fully published and peer-reviewed. And then just last week, within the past week, a new study came out where they looked at every single, I'm going to share my screen while I talk. They looked at every single, let's get rid of the chat window here. This is a reminder, this is my one-page review of evidence that I made for busy people. So the recent study that came out looked at everybody who in Quest Diagnostic System in the US who had both a vitamin D test and a COVID test. And what they found is summarized in this graph. Can you guys see my slides or see my screen? So this graph is the chance of a positive COVID test versus the blood serum vitamin D level. And you can see that all the way up to 55 nanograms per milliliter, there appears to be a protective effect before it flattens out. And the, down below, this is the Endocrine Society recommendation minimum, 30 nanograms per milliliter. This is considered clinical, or sorry, here's 30 nanograms per milliliter. So this is considered insufficient if you're below this. And then here's the clinical deficiency level. And the plot is very much a steep slope of much more likely to be infected with COVID. That study, what's notable about that is that there were 190,000 samples, people in the study. So that's 25 times bigger than the previous biggest observational study. And then the next thing that's happened recently is that Dr. Anthony Fauci came out in an interview and admitted that vitamin D reduced the risk of infection, just as this graph suggests, and that he himself takes vitamin D to help prevent getting COVID-19. This is considered widely to be a huge controversy since he only said this when asked in an interview with a celebrity interviewer on Instagram Live, and this isn't part of any official public health messaging. Later on in an unconfirmed email that somebody posted on a video of, it was claimed he appears to have said that the dose he takes is 6,000 IU, which is above the upper limit. So this is a little bit of a controversy, and we're hoping that that this will get into official messaging. So there's also a really interesting paper that, how do I get rid of this? I want to just move this, there we go. So this is a paper that that was in preprint form, and the guy who authored this is a causal inference model. For those who don't know about causal inference modeling, it's a way to take observational data and draw conclusions about causality direction. These are directed acyclic causal graphs, and you can use that to test whether the causal version of the data or the acausal version of the data are more likely and fit the data better. And this paper overwhelmingly concluded that the relationship between D levels and severity of COVID-19 was vastly, overwhelmingly causal. And so that was only in preprint form. I've been in contact with the author of that, and they're going to try to get that published now. We have, the other thing that's happening is we're starting a campaign, kind of like the mask campaign. There was this guy, Jeremy Howard, who made this Masks for All campaign, where they got lots and lots of credible people to sign on to advocate for masks, and we're sort of starting to do the same thing with vitamin D. I actually just got in touch with Jeremy Howard directly today, and so I'm going to pitch him and see if he's got pearls of wisdom and maybe can even throw his own direct support through. So that's what's going on. I'm hoping this will help end the pandemic more quickly so that we can get back to the important aging work.
Thank you so much. Wow, fantastic. Any questions?
Carl, could I adopt the very simplistic mental model for why this works based on Amy Proal's talk from a week or two ago, where she proposed that vitamin D is actually part of a family of different signaling compounds that either turn on or off certain kinds of inflammation reactions.
That's right. They're both
which one it is, and since COVID is kind of thought of as like a an overact, like a lot of the pathology is like an overreaction of inflammation in certain parts of the body, that it's not so much that like you have a deficiency in vitamin D that you need to remedy, as much as if you offset the imbalance in one particular direction for one particular subspecies of the vitamin D family, that can turn off that part of the immune system and save you from killing yourself.
So Amy was concerned that there are many different forms of vitamin D. They've complicated biochemistry. Amy was concerned that one form seems to suppress the immune system in some way, and then a different form that it later turns into seems to suppress inflammation, and therefore is helpful against cytokine storm, and sort of in some ways does the same thing as some of the steroid treatments. She was concerned that more of the earlier form could actually be negative and unhelpful against COVID-19 because of its suppression. That seems to not be the case. So this new study, overwhelming, almost 200,000 samples, evidence that it seems like you're less likely to get COVID if you have a high serum level, which would include the high amount of the earlier version. So I think and we talked about this a little when, in the follow-on discussion, that session here. I think that the overwhelming evidence now seems like vitamin D, having sufficient levels of vitamin D, both helps against initial infection and against making sure that you don't get the severe form that involves cytokine storm. Another thing that happened since that previous session is a big paper came out on what's become known as the Bradykinen Hypothesis. There was a big paper that talked about the details of the biochemical mechanisms of COVID-19 in general, and specifically around this system called Bradykinin. It's a particular complicated mess of biochemistry that's related to ACE2 and the RAS system, but it fit a lot of the data about everything that was known, and it made big waves. Even Derek Lowe posted it in the Pipeline blog. There's a bradykinin storm, which is sort of like the cytokine storm, but also distinct. And it seems very clear that vitamin D is protective against that. So it's protective against the cytokine storm, the bradykinin storm, but it also seems to be protective in terms of early infection as well, as this data from this new Kaufman et al. Study show. But that's consistent with earlier data. The 25 times less large study, previously largest study, was a N equals 8,000 roughly study from an Israeli health organization, which also concluded about a 50% lower risk of, or a 50% higher risk of infection in the first place if you.
Okay, lovely. Thank you so much. Any other question to Carl? Otherwise, we'll be moving on into the group discussion.
Carl.
Of course, Kriyan.
Yeah,
you have 1 minute for this.
All this vitamin D stuff seems to be exemplar of a more generic phenomenon, which is that a lot of things which seem to make people healthier also protect them against COVID. And if we weren't so busy shutting down the world economy and trampling on everyone's civil rights in the name of protection from COVID, we might be able to leverage this. And we could say, yes, COVID's coming back. You better all get healthy and take your D and get out in the sun and stop your inflammatory lifestyles, et cetera. Do you think that somehow the longevity community and the health community can actually leverage this, or is it too late? Like, can we get people more healthy under the guise of COVID, but it's actually just going to get them healthier and have them live longer? Yeah, so you're absolutely right. In a lot of ways, there are a huge number of risk factors that predispose you to worse COVID outcomes. In some ways, COVID is this disease that finds your weakest link and attacks you there. Like almost any deviation from optimal health becomes a risk of becomes more severe COVID risk, whether it's any of the known established comorbidities that count as diseases like heart disease, type 1 diabetes, et cetera, or any number of different deficiencies, whether it's vitamin D, zinc, selenium, et cetera. So what's special about vitamin D and why I picked it as a leverage point is that, if you look at all the different risk factors, all the different things that you can look at as things that increase COVID risk, they vary by three main things, right? They vary by how easy they are to modify,
how much evidence there is about how direct that link is in terms of how much of a risk factor it is, and what exactly is the effect size, like how much of it. So there's the evidence amount, and then there's the effect size, and they're somewhat related, right? Because the bigger effect size requires less evidence to see. But there's sort of how much data is there, or how much data is there, and how big is the effect, and then how easy it is it for people to modify it quickly, right? And vitamin D is far and away the thing that optimizes those three the best, right? There are lots of other things for which there's good data and high effect size, like severe obesity, but the speed with which you can reverse and the difficulty that some people have reversing that problem is high. And then there's things like type 1 diabetes. Yeah, if your type 1 diabetes is out of control, it would be much better to get it under control quickly. That's not always easy for some people. Another example of an important risk factor that doesn't seem to be as high a leverage point as vitamin D is sleep. If you're very sleep deprived or you don't get enough sleep, it's clear your immune system doesn't work as well. But the problem is we don't have good data on that specifically with COVID, because the problem is we don't have good data on how much people sleep. So the typical, you can't look at people who have COVID or who have severe COVID versus not and compare how much they sleep in general, because we just don't have a lot of good data sets on how much people sleep. So what's unique about vitamin D is it's very easy to change. All you have to do is pop some pills, and in a few weeks, your levels are way up. And we have good data now with large sample sizes on people with and without COVID, or with severe and less severe COVID. And the effect size is huge, right? Even at the upper end of the 95% confidence interval, we're talking about a 75% reduction in the only RCT so far. And the mean of the OR for that study was 0.03. Like, it completely squashed the need to go to the ICU. So all three things really good. So we might be wasting an opportunity to get people to live healthier, which may delay their death by 10 or 15 years while we try to get real life extension and anti-aging technology online. But the most important thing right now is just to save as many lives as possible and squash the pandemic. And when that happens, people will probably go back to their old way of thinking, but maybe we can keep the conversation going.
All right, great. I think you got like a thumbs up there. So that was quite a comprehensive answer. All right, lovely. I would love to ask Sergio Ola if he's still here. Reason to come kind of like back onto the panel. I have two questions for you basically, and I'm hoping that those can then kind of like go into a group discussion. So the first question is, if you haven't said that, and I don't think many of you have in your presentation, what parts of your updates are interesting for this group? So are there specific bottlenecks that you're facing in your work right now that this group could help with, or are there specific opportunities that you'd like to make this group aware of? And then, let's take the question also broader for the aging community as a whole. As a community, and like we as a group, for example, what do you think, we should collectively be focusing on in the aging field right now? What do you think is the main bottleneck that we should be looking out for? Sergio, I see you here first. So do you want to take a stab at that? And then, we'll open up for group discussion afterwards.
The bottlenecks, so we're at the fund, we're focused on making sure our companies thrive under this environment. So thankfully, all of them are relatively well funded. There's always a need for more funding. In other words, if we had extra money, that means we can go faster or into different directions that would make the science even stronger to get through the FDA, et cetera. It's been a challenge just getting good talent to the Bay Area for companies that are in the Bay Area. Everybody's fleeing. And that has been a challenge. But overall, thankfully, the teams that we've been able to set up are producing at this point.
Are you looking for specific people?
Yeah, I mean, we're always hiring different kinds of, especially researchers, lab scientists, people to carry out experiments. So, I have job descriptions. If anybody has a network of those, let me know. I'd love to shoot a couple of job descriptions. And then aside from that, just maintaining publicity, making sure that people know we're still here. I love the conversation about COVID, but it has taken everybody's mind share. And with good reason, but at the same time, it's so political now that unless you have, the people that are polluting the conversation, and I'm talking about the politicians and the media, change the narrative into something that's a little bit more proactive and less worried about who gets elected next. It's really hard to go against that. So I would say funding people, and just putting together events to give people an outlet, to go from let's keep talking about COVID and who gets elected to, wow, let's talk about the future, because the future is going to be there, pandemic or not. That would be my thing. And then I guess for Methuselah, we're engaged in this new prize with NASA. I'd love to figure out any partnerships here. Carl, believe it or not, our goal here is to create the replicator in a way, not just for space, but for Earth. And we envision a future where you wake up and a Fitbit or whatever tells you you're deficient in vitamin D, and it enriches the food that you're going to consume throughout the day with vitamin D. So you don't have to remember taking pills. You just have to remember to eat, which your body's really good at telling you that you need food. So that's the kind of stuff that we're looking at. We got NASA involved, and they want to support it with a few millions of dollars. And that's where we're going next. Space, food, longevity. And if anybody wants to be a part of it somehow, collaborating and sponsoring, or just being involved as an admin of sorts, let us know. Love to get the help.
Very cool. Right. Okay, I'll follow up with you on that, and specifically also on, I think on the blog postings, actually, on the job postings, I think we could even be doing something, because I heard from a few people that kind of like just finished up their PhDs and they're actually searching for work because they want to stay in the US, and otherwise they would need to leave. So there may be something there. Okay, lovely. Who am I interrupting here? Reason, I'm interrupting you or Ole?
Maybe. You can also go first.
Sorry?
Reason can go first.
I'll go first. I have a very boring answer as to bottlenecks, which is money, as always. And the fix for that is give us some. I think usefully we would like introductions for our clinical round that will be occurring probably a few months from now in earnest. And of course, we have all that ready to go, but it never hurts to have more introductions to people who can earnestly lead and actually do something useful while earnestly leading. So we're certainly interested in expanding our collection of people who can do that. And one should assume that if anybody turns up with $5 to $10 million, I can find a way to spend it to make the world a much better place. If you happen to know anybody who happens to have $5 to $10 million they're willing to put into research. And as to the COVID situation, I think honestly it's going to be 6 to 12 months before things settle down to the point at which we would see the expected across the board increase in investment and grants and everything else going into tackling immune aging. I think that just isn't a thing right now. People are still wear the masks and not really thinking about the biochemistry or indeed anything other than.
It's already quite optimistic. I think you're assuming that it's going to happen at all.
Well, true. I mean, I think the smarter people know what has to be done, but they need the furore to settle down a little bit before they can actually get on and do it, is my model.
Okay, great. Any specific thing that you think we should be pushing for as a group?
As a group, putting more money into all of these companies that we are spawning as a community. That might sound like a little bit of a selfish ideal, but I just want a slice of it. Everybody else gets a slice as well.
Okay, 110 million slides to reason. The rest is then for the community. All right. Okay. Next one up, Ole. First of all, what's a bottleneck? What's interesting for this group in terms of updates from Apollo? And then second, what do you think as a collective we could be doing right now to push for aging progress?
Yeah, it's not getting much more interesting with me. So yeah, also of course looking for money and people. So of course I'm happy when investors are introduced to us who want to invest in the VC in the longevity space. And yeah, I mean we're also looking for people. So we are looking for new entrepreneur in residence candidates because we have a few companies that we want to build. Yeah, I mean we want to start end of this year and want to build them really next year. So we are starting to look for postdocs who have done their PhD in the aging space, but I mean, they don't have to have done their PhD necessarily in the aging space. I mean, this is a big plus, but just people who are interested in that space. And I mean, if you know someone who is like a senior pharma executive or something like that, but is very, or has an expertise in drug development, we would also take him as an entrepreneur in residence. And even people who have an idea to build a company, but don't have a structure to do it and not the money, they can also come to us. So, I mean, if the idea is in the aging space and we think it makes sense, we would also do that. So, yeah. If you know someone who wants to build a company in that space with or without an idea, just send them to me.
Great. Okay. And collectively, do you think there's like one particular thing that you'd like, kind of like, let's say the group of kind of like loosely affiliated folks in the aging community, what do you think is a common thread that we should be pushing harder that may be neglected?
I mean, as I already said, when I gave an update to Apollo, I think it's really important to spread the word and to get the message across that we really have to work on aging. I mean, everyone is now so focused on COVID and curing COVID, but I mean, COVID is not a problem here. And I think this message has to be spread. And I think this is what everyone here in the group can do.
Okay, great. With that, we have Sergio. Do you want to?
Yeah, just I'm going to put a little seed on people's minds because it seems like money across the board can solve some things, right? And then people. So I've been looking deeply for the last 6 months at SPACs, special acquisition purpose companies, right? Corporations. It's a very interesting model where you're able to raise money rather quickly and also IPO a company. The truth of the matter is if a longevity SPAC is usually at this point is probably about a year or two away because the company needs to be big enough to be able to hold the SPAC. But if there's enough heads here that want to create a longevity foresight SPAC, for example, it'd be really nice to potentially craft it and wrap up a few projects under one major big company that will be a flagship moving forward. And this is a flagship from the movement, not a flagship or a longevity company that has been, financially engineered by people who aren't necessarily mission oriented. So if we all wanted to potentially, make a splash and fund a variety of projects, I think a SPAC would be a really cool way to do it. We just need to craft it in a.
Well, it's funny you should say that, Sergio, because I'm actually in the process of working on something on exactly those lines, which I'll be able to talk about in a month or so.
SPAC.
No, I say, exactly. I'm working on something exactly like that. So it's funny you should mention it. Great minds think alike, eh?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we've vetted about 5 different law firms and about 4 different investment bankers We have the investment bankers and the top law firm who want to do something. They love the space. The question is, what do we put in that company?
We should talk offline, and we can probably work together on that.
Absolutely.
So
okay,
I have a bottleneck to suggest also. But before we leave the SPAC thing, I'll just say also that I think that, a good thing to try to do here in that world is try to convince some of the big names who aren't longevity focused to take note, and we can get maybe one of the existing ones to jump into the field as one of their companies that they look at. But so what I want to suggest is, first of all, when people said money, I want to suggest the specific thing of money. I think that there's a particular bottleneck at the Series A stage for companies that don't have a big tech heavy focus but want higher valuations than the East Coast biotech firms. But I want to focus on a different bottleneck that I think that I want to offer a piece of optimism for. The company building, we've got more of that, more people doing that, and that's great. I think we probably need more of that. But going back a stage, I think what we need is more people going into biology and related fields as an educational priority, starting at the college level, at the undergraduate level. In the 90s, when the dot-com thing happened, one of the effects of the sort of dot-com 1.0 through like 97, 98 was that enrollment in computer science as an undergraduate degree like doubled or tripled. And that is one of the things that I think helped drive the tech sector in the next decade after that. We need a similar thing to happen in biology. And I think that COVID-19 might actually be something that's happening, that's helping with that. And it's not just undergraduate level too. We also need better distributed education ways for people who switch to this as a field or a focus of interest from other fields, including financiers, to quickly come up to speed. And I think that would really help the field. And so everything that everybody's doing in education, what the Buck's doing, trying to create PhDs with USC that are specifically focused on this, and what other people are doing at creating online courses and publishing books is all useful, but we need more of this to help bring more people up to speed on what is essentially a really complicated field.
Do you think that, you mentioned online courses, but like one strategy would be, to actually try to catch them while they're doing their A-levels and then, before they go into their first degrees? Or do you think that rather from universities, we should be trying to intervene there? Like which state do you think is early enough? It should be really schools, like high schools, right? Ideally.
I think you could get away without learning any biology in high school and then still go into it later. I don't know if getting it to people in high school makes them more likely to like it. I think that really depends on the high school. But once they decide that it's interesting or lucrative or important, what COVID has done is we've got millions of social media backseat biologists essentially, and but getting those people to have more legitimate underlying understanding would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. I actually think that, I do think that there's a few, at least in the broader Foresight vicinity, that are currently looking for jobs. So on the kind of short end, I will try to hook you, Sergio, and Ola up with them. And I think, the long-term end is definitely also, I don't know, what do you think would be the strategy to do that then, to go into universities, to just offer alternative online courses for those that are already doing it? Like, do you think that there's any value in focusing on the traditional system at all? Or do you think we should just now, especially that everything's moving online, we should just try to kind of like get people up to speed quicker online on the relevant issues?
Just a little social commentary. We have millions of kids throughout the world now learning online. There's no way the current model of academia, of being present at all times, is going to continue. People are changing the way they learn. So absolutely, I think it would be fantastic to create or to go online and to democratize this kind of information so that more people are able to access it. And as the industry grows, people are able to generate income because they're like, I would say like quantum computing scientists were, 15 years ago. They were just started, and now they're all making $1 million salaries. So absolutely, I think that's important.
Okay, thank you. Then one thing maybe to go back to the SPAC. Could you give an example of a SPAC existing in a different field right now? That would be an interesting model to look at.
When we started looking at this, so SPACs have gone in and out of favor throughout the last 20 years. I think the latest number is more than half or 60% of all IPOs today are done via SPAC. It shot up, I think 4 months ago, it was 30%. One of the big ones was Virgin Galactic, I think, was done. That's in the space realm. But now you have different companies like there's a couple of pharma executives who now are being given these blank checks. So that's what they're called, blank check companies. So it's a sophisticated model, but I'm going to try to simplify it into 3 stages. The first stage is you raise money to raise a pile of cash and take it public. So you raise money so that you can get your investment bankers, your brokers, and your law firms, and then you go out and say, I'm going to raise $200 million, right? And this $200 million, I'm going to take, and I'm going to take public. So I'm going to take $200 million, take them to the market, and the company is going to be worth a little bit more than $200 million. And you're probably thinking, how does that work? Well, because you put together a management team and you're telling the world, we just raised $200 million and we're going to go out there and put together deals. So you need to create a management team that is very good at a certain industry and has their ear to the ground, and everybody can feel, they're going to get it done. So with $200 million, you go out and you start talking to a list of companies and you say, listen, you're a private company. You're worth about 100 to 150 million, right? Why don't I give you cash today, but I'm going to buy you at a deal. I have to buy you at a deal because we both win. If I can tell the markets, Wall Street, that I got a great deal buying you, then everybody's going to want to put their money into the wrap-up company, into that pile of $200 million, because they're going to say that was a great price, and the company is just going to go higher because of this capital infusion. So it's a really cool thing, because what it does, it tells the world that that there's a lot of opportunity, and it realizes the opportunity before it's carried out, so that the companies wrapped up in the SPAC have funding to go out and get whatever needs to be done. The way
I think you're being a little. I think you're virtually you're on the border of overhype here and pixie dust. Essentially it's a way for a company to go public without having to do a roadshow and all the other stuff that usually, that puts lots of money into the investment banks who run the going public, right? There's a sort of typical Wall Street way that a company can raise a lot of money in public markets and then be publicly traded. This is an alternative which gives more money to the company than they would get from the IPO process, with less work and more speed. But who it does give money to, instead of sort of Wall Street investment banks, is the people who set up the company, which is essentially set up as a public hollow shell company that then acquires the private company, as the way that the private company then becomes a publicly listed company. So what you often need to make it work is a good reputation of the person who creates the shell, and they should be somebody that the private company then thinks is value add in picking which shell they want to get acquired by. And then you get these one-on-one discussions, and instead of having to do a roadshow for months and talk to, and pour your heart out to everybody. So there's advantages in terms of a way to go public, but it doesn't add a whole lot of value to the industry or individual private company. It just saves some work on the typical IPO rigmarole, which is a lot of bureaucracy. I
would enhance what you're saying. I agree. I mean, it sounds too good to be true. The numbers, I'm businessman, by training, economist by training. The numbers suggest that the market is super receptive to this kind of stuff. So wealth is created. And unless you're an actual company grinding through the fundraising, like Reason said, I can use $5 million more. The benefit of having the ability to fund so many companies at the same time under one entity, and changing that effort spent talking to people into actually getting the science forward and into the markets are tremendous. So you're right. There are some downsides. You can't overhype it, but there's a reason why more than half of all IPOs out there are through a SPAC, and why this year, even though it's such a sucky year, crappy year, there's so many IPOs. There's so many IPOs because a lot of these companies are realizing this is a way to get funded.
So just to clarify, I wouldn't say money is created. I would say that less money is lost to the investment banking industry.
I would say wealth is created, not money.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments to spark to those? Anyone? No, okay, I'm seeing a few links posted in the chat. All right, thank you so much. I think, I would be keen. Maybe we can. Maybe I'll message you offline, or like online, but like on the side of this group, Sergio, and maybe we can see if even amongst this group we could get something together. And I know that Aubrey and you are probably also going to talk. But okay, so for now, I think I would love to kind of follow up with. Perhaps a follow-up on this, plus potentially some job postings that we can circulate in the communities. Are there any other kind of comments or questions that are left from the group today? All right. Okay. Thank you so much to Ole, to Sergio, to Reason, and to Carl for your updates. How do people generally feel about this kind of like updates from the community, plus then a guided discussion more on what can we collectively do to move the field forward? Was this good? Yeah, I see a few thumbs up. Sergio, you have nothing to compare it to because it's your first time you're joining us, but thanks that you liked it.
I've learned a lot, so thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining. I'm going to open up breakout rooms for those who'd like to continue chatting, and I'm hoping that I'll see you next week. And this is a reminder from me to please take a few minutes to fill out the Google Doc that I'm posting in the chat right now. This will help me determine what's useful to you from those groups, and hope to make those meetings much more valuable to you. Okay, I'm going to open up one breakout room for all of you and for those who like to continue chatting. And I'm hoping that I'll see many of you next week, where we're going to maybe expand on this format and maybe do a version of that. So for now, thank you so much, and I'll be following up by email. Thank you to all the speakers for coming. It was really good. Very like a lot of information conveyed in a very short time. Okay, I'll be following up with you, and the breakout rooms are created. I'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.